today's session. In the meantime, please rename yourselves in the chat, the organizations that you are presenting, and please let us know in the chat where are you from. And I will start with a brief intro about MENTEE, where I serve as board of director. So at MENTEE, we are a platform, an online platform, where we work with different NGOs, organizations, and institutes, and global corporations to address different challenges that people are facing around the globe. Our transformative online ecosystem basically supports individuals from the age of 18 older with no upper age limit to open access for global mentors. Basically, we offer guidance, language support, alternative knowledge sharing. We also offer university certifications, and we connect mentees with their mentors across the globe with whatever they need actual support in for them to overcome local challenges that they are facing. On the panel for today, I'm happy to introduce the panelists that we have. First of all, we have Laura from CONCAT. Laura, please, if you can introduce yourself very briefly for a few lines for people to know about you.
Yeah, sure. Hello, my name is Laura. I am from the UK, but I have been living in Lebanon for the past 7 years. In 2021, I started CONCAT, which is first refugee and female run design and development company. We employ mainly women from the Middle East, so Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. And we employ them to work on digital projects basically from around the world. And then earlier this year, we've launched CONCAT Recruit, which is a recruitment company aimed at linking untapped top technical talent from the Middle East to companies around the world, mainly in the GCC like Dubai and Saudi. Very excited to be here and talk about such an important and pressing topic.
Thank you, Laura. All right, our second panelist for today is Hajara Sani, who's a global talent acquisition partner at ABT Global, sorry. Hajara, please, can you introduce yourself as well for our audience for today?
All right, then thank you very much, Mohammad. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning or evening, wherever you're joining from. My name is Hajara Sani. I am the Global Talent Acquisition Business Partner for ABT Global. I have been in the global talent acquisition sphere for the past 3 years. My focus is mainly non-profit and development industry. And in the last 4 years, I've actually focused on basically just talent acquisition, employee engagement, and organization development within multinational environments. So looking forward to speaking to you all today, and hopefully you take a thing or two away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hajara. Right, our third panelist for today is Elana Wong. Elana, please, can you introduce yourself as well for everybody?
Yeah, I'm not sure if she joined us yet.
She hasn't joined us yet? Oh.
Or maybe with a different name. I'm just checking.
All right. All right. We also have Yusuf Yahya, who's the founder of Savannah Innovation Labs. Is Yusuf with us as well?
Yeah. Hi, Mohammad. Thank you guys for having me.
Yusuf, how are you?
Laura, good to see you again. My name is Yusuf Yahya. I'm the founder of Savannah Innovation Labs. Savannah is an incubator and advisory firm that operates out of Khartoum, Sudan. And after the recent conflict that broke in Sudan a year ago, our focus has now been in Sudan and the Sudanese diaspora that now has been displaced into neighboring countries. So we work on upskilling Sudanese youth, whether that being with technical assistance or access to finance, and now helping them to kind of integrate into their new host communities. Very happy to join the conversation and looking forward to an engaging discussion. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. All right. So the title of today's session is basically overcoming perceived challenges and recruiting displaced individuals, and basically providing the accessibility of remote work for individuals who have the talents and have the willpower for them to actually apply for jobs, cross borders, and to put their skills into work and to actually be part of a bigger initiatives that they believe in. So we're going to be going through our questions for today in a way where we can build up on the conversation. We can actually assess what are the key points that we're going to have to be working on moving forward. And then, of course, we're going to open up the floor for Q&A at the end of the panel session for today, for us to hear from the audience with us today, and to hear some feedback, and basically for all of us to think out loud. So our first question for today is, what are the principles underlying, what are the key principles behind recruitment whenever you want to actually process your recruitment or identify what are the key positions that you want to go for in terms of recruitment and according to your teams? Does it start from the CSR? Does it start from HR? Does it start from management itself? How do you usually go about it in your companies? Whoever would like to start, please go ahead. That's good.
So in the website of things, we recruit mainly from Middle East talent, right? We have quite a big talent pool already that we normally tap into. We recruit a lot from partners on the ground. So we have coding boot camps that we're partnered with in Lebanon or in Palestine. And they send us a lot of their talent, and we also advertise our roles amongst them. That is a really great way for us to basically do the initial filtering. So we can say we need a developer for this, or we need a developer for that. And they then can help us say, you know, this person's committed, this person's got the right skills. So that's a really useful way for us. I think that can be taken forward as a very useful way to help with recruitment, like partner with other organizations, build partnerships with people that can either funnel talent to you or can help you, you know, recruit within the area that you're looking for, whether that's a marketing community. If you're looking for marketers, you know what I mean? You can find different partners within that space. That's been a huge bonus for us in the recruitment, because recruiting is really hard and it takes time to find the right people and to make sure that they're right for the company. So I think being able to vet the talent through a third party as a first step can be a really useful thing.
Right. Yusuf, Hajara.
Okay, so let me just go next. So the recruitment process is usually initiated from the hiring team, possibly if it's a specific department that is in need of a candidate, either as a replacement or as a new role, or for me, that is in the NGO or development industry. Sometimes we have like maybe new project, or we have proposal projects, pipeline projects. Then we tend to identify if we're looking for like key personnel for these projects, and that's what initiates our need. And we tend to advertise based on the geographical area we're looking for. For instance, my company has presence in almost 44 countries. So based on where the project is located, we tend to channel our recruitment resources to that locality. We look at job boards, for instance, that are like very, very popular in the job board, in that locality. And we also use LinkedIn heavily as well. And we also do a lot of headhunting, because sometimes there is a number of niche roles we look for, particularly now that climate change is a thing. And we have like new projects coming up in climate change and the energy space. There's always need to go an extra mile. So for that, we go beyond just advertising and using like the popular job boards in the locality, and we tend to headhunt for these roles. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess on our side, it's a combination of both, right? So depending on which projects we're working on and which partners that we're working with, and what are the goals that we're actually targeting to kind of achieve, we then go ahead and start headhunting for the talent that we need to work with. That's speaking about our internal operations. And that usually comes in from a roster of friends that we've worked with, partners that we've worked with before, educational institutions like universities that we've partnered with in Sudan, and so on and so forth. So these tend to be the way that we go about recruitment, right? So just internally assessing what the needs are, and then reaching out to our partners to seeing who we are able to kind of work with as we go forward. So yeah.
All right, cool. What is your general experience with basically recruitment in a remote session, in a remote structure or a remote environment? So our shift into remote work in the recent years was already on its own a challenge for a lot of corporates, for a lot of initiatives worldwide. And now we're trying to basically include displaced and underserved individuals in our recruitment strategies. At the same time, it's a remote recruitment strategy. So let's talk first about what's your experience with remote recruitment, and then we can actually expand more on this conversation.
Yeah, I think I'll take a stab at this one. I think when we speak about remote recruitment, especially when you speak about displaced communities, you need to kind of understand what the home environment looks like, right? Because it's not that the person just getting the job and just them logging on online, right? Who's living with them in the household? How are they engaging with these people? Do they have a private space in order for them to be able to kind of work out of or not? So our goal here, or our job, extends beyond just offering the job, but also finding local partners that are going to be able to kind of host these individuals in their spaces, right? So we rely a lot on something called the AfriLabs network, and it's the Pan-African Hubs network, where we tap into the markets where our partners operate in, and we ask them to host some of our employees or some of our consultants in their co-working spaces, and that one gives them the space in order for them to be able to kind of work at ease, and takes a lot of that burden out of them, but also helps ease them into the new communities that they're working in and working out of. So I think it goes beyond just the employing of the person, but actually catering and taking into account what that whole household environment would look like from our side.
Right.
Yeah, I think also it's important when talking about this to mention, like, finding ways to pay them sustainably, wherever they are in the world, and whether we're talking about refugees or migrants or host communities. That's been a big problem for us, and we found workarounds, and it's something that we speak to partners about and companies always, and there are definitely solutions, but it does, if you're working on employing people that are in countries of conflict at that time, it can be a challenge in finding solutions that are definitely sustainable. So I think that's just something to kind of mention in this wider conversation. It's one of the biggest challenges that we've faced at CONCAT, and also I think something that still is being really under addressed globally. So yeah, I think though for us, the remote side of the recruiting has been okay. I think what is more important when you're recruiting remotely is to really challenge and test the candidate's personality, more so than obviously when you're meeting them face to face. You can gauge sometimes a bit easier who they are. So for us, we've really worked on our HR process around figuring out and analyzing that candidate and making sure that they're a suitable match for us. I think things like technical skills are quite easy to test, whether it's remote or in person, because we use our own platform for that. But the personality and kind of suitability for that specific role, we've really had to work around the questions that we ask, and how do we actually get direct answers that really help us understand that person, and that's something that we've had to focus a lot on in the remote interview model. But I think, yeah, it's definitely possible, and there's definitely positives of it, right? It means that you can hire so much more diversely, and really access people in far out corners of the globe that ultimately are the ones that really need employment.
All right. Is everyone who's employed at the moment under CONCAT are they all working remotely at the moment? Or is there like a...
Yeah. No, so since day one, we've been fully remote.
All right.
Yeah.
Hajara, what's your
All right,
input on that?
All right, then I think I'm going to build a little bit on what Laura said, because it's quite similar, though we're not fully remote, 100% like all the employees. We have over 3,000 plus employees, and not everyone is remote. I am remote because I work for the US team and I'm based in Abuja, Nigeria. So I would say like I'm a typical example of a remote worker. So for us, the approach is different. And in the last 2 years, APT is trying to really diversify its workforce. There was kind of like, you can't do this without data. So there was data which was broken down into departments and units just to kind of like see the group that is underrepresented in each, and we like made conscious efforts to fill in that gap to see like, oh, okay, we need to hire more, for instance, African Americans for this department because it is very maybe particularly dense with a particular ethnicity. So I know we have really done well in that aspect. So in terms of like hiring remote, I think now most of the roles are actually remote. You're trying to like get someone to work for Vietnam, for instance, and the person is based in, let's say, Singapore. We're trying, because I think sometimes we kind of like find it difficult to find talent, especially as she said, when you're not able to interview the person in person, and I kind of like trying to gauge the personality, or kind of like trying to gauge the candidates, whether they fit the culture of the organization, and in a smaller term, whether they fit into the culture of the department. Another issue, which I'm very happy Laura raised, which I know has been a problem, has been an issue for discussion, and maybe we'll be able to find a solution on this summit, is global mobility. There is that, you would see companies like advertise roles on LinkedIn and are like, it's remote, and then you're kind of like trying to apply, maybe you're in Kenya, and then you see like, oh, you have to be based in the United States. I always have a problem with it because I'm like, then why did you put remote? I feel it doesn't really like explain the word, what remote worker means. I feel like personally, to me, I don't know if anyone on this call would agree to me, I feel like a remote worker should be based anywhere in the world. Like that's the word remote, like you don't have to be there. So I feel like 90% of the adverts on LinkedIn are like, oh, remote is very misleading because it's more like a clickbait, like, oh, it's remote, I don't have to relocate, and like this role fits perfectly fine. So we're actually at APT, we're actually trying to do away with that, and like we're not like remote based in US, and I think it's kind of like a bit biased. So we're trying to make it to be hybrid. It's either it's hybrid, it's on site, or we're doing global worldwide remote. Another issue that worldwide remote has is maybe, as Laura said, when you're trying to pay like salaries, it can be a bit difficult with some countries how to go about that. There's the issue of taxation, with some countries as well. There's the issue of, oh, maybe you're based in Lebanon, for instance. Do you have to, if you're maybe from Jordan, like, do you have to pay tax in both Jordan and Lebanon? Is the employee willing to take that? Like, there are so many questions surrounding global mobility. And then there is always like, okay, since you don't have a presence in that country, which employer is going to have like the legal contract? One of the solutions, what we do with that is there's something we call employer of contract. We tend to partner with organizations in different countries that do similar things to what we do to become employer of contract for our employees. And an instance I can give is when we started our Ukraine response, we did not have a presence in Ukraine. So we had to like find an employer of contract to just kind of like take on our employees. We do everything We do everything. We send them the funds to pay for the salary. We've given them our structure. They were willing to have our employees under their legal entity, pending when we finalized the whole legalization and company registration in Ukraine. So I think this is a discussion that needs to be carried forward. How do we solve the issues around global mobility? So when you tell an employee, when you advertise a job and you're like remote, like you really mean it's remote, I can take care of you wherever you are globally. So I think that's my piece on that.
Yeah, but I'd like to kind of push back a bit here, right? In essence, the assumption here is that all remote workers are equal, right? When remote workers from the global south are at a great disadvantage when it comes to the pay grade, and then if you add to that displaced remote workers, almost never find their luck in landing jobs, right? I mean, and if you look at the Sudanese community, Sudan is currently the largest humanitarian crisis that's happening in the world, and some tend to even dub it as the forgotten war right now. People don't tend to hire Sudanese remote workers because of the assumption that Sudan is still under sanctions by the US. And then even if these OFAC laws have been changed, no HR department is actually going to be willing to go ahead and dismantle whatever policies they have, because an employer says, hey, the country is sanctioned, I am not sanctioned as an individual, please do work with me, right? And aside from that, when people are in displaced communities, I think they don't understand that they have the bargaining power, right? Being a migrant and being a displaced personnel from the global south does not equate to what's happening. I mean, we've seen the treatment that the Ukrainian refugees and the migrants have gotten throughout the crisis that have happened, right? But we're not saying that there's one crisis that's more important than the other, but I'm just saying that there's a disproportionate disadvantage and way of treatment when it comes to both, right? So I just want us to be very careful when speaking about that, because I don't think that there is a band-aid solution or one standard that fits for all cases in the same time.
That's true, and that's true, Yusuf. I believe for every response country that we're trying to work for, we're going to have our own challenges for us to face. And whenever we're recruiting people from a different geographical region and geographical area, there's just another constraints that are coming up because of that region, or because of certain legislations and policies that are put in place. And I believe we've all had this challenge before. I think Elana just joined us as well. Elana, are you with us?
Yes, I am. I'm so sorry. I had the wrong
Hey,
time
how are
for
you?
some reason.
How are you doing today? Okay, and then we're still at our second question for today. So please, if you can take a minute just to introduce everybody to what do you do, and I will let you know about our questions, so also you can share with us your ideas.
Sure, of course. Would you like me to do that now?
Sorry?
Would you like me to do that now?
Yeah. Let's go.
Yeah,
So we can
perfect.
just improve it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And I'm, again, very, very sorry for my tardiness. I have no idea how I got the time wrong, but I'm very happy to be with you all today. My name is Elana Wong, and I'm the coordinator of the Civil Society Action Committee, which is the largest global platform for migration-related civil society engagement into governance and policy at an international level. And then simultaneously also the coordinator of the Secretariat for the GFMD, which is the Global Forum for Migration and Development civil society mechanism. So we coordinate all of civil society engagement into that process as well, which is an intergovernmental process. And I want to thank Letitia for inviting me today as well, because this is part of a conversation that we have ongoing. And I think even though we don't specifically work just on displacement and displaced communities, the conversation around displacement and access to employment, access to services and different opportunities for displaced people is also expanding a lot into the migration space, specifically because the lines around displacement, what is displacement, what doesn't count, lines around around access to employment for communities that are on the move are also becoming more blurred as the lines between specifically migration governance and refugee and asylum governance is becoming more blurred due to climate change, protracted displacement, etc. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Elana. All right, so let's have your input on our next question. Our next question basically says, if you've ever hired displaced individuals, how was your experience with that? And let's talk some numbers. Let's talk about your experience with this.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much, Mohammad. So one thing that I was doing actually prior to my current position was I was leading a youth-led platform called the Migration, Youth and Children Platform. And one of the pieces of work we did was set up something called the Youth on the Move Fellowship with UNICEF. And this was actually the first fellowship, internship, but compensated work experience opportunity for namely displaced individuals or young people from displaced communities. And most of them ended up being ones with refugee status or in situations of protracted displacement. This proved to be quite a challenge because, as you can imagine, the UN human resources system is not necessarily set up like many of our institutions to allow for people from displaced communities to properly engage. And a number of the things that we had to change was, for example, even just the HR recruitment system, what it means to have qualified education, whether people could bring their qualifications abroad with them, whether they could complete things like high school and college was something that is not the usual question. You cannot just apply the blanket statement of UN requirement of a master's degree to those who are from displaced communities and maybe did not have the chance to continue their education, but were still very qualified and had a lot of the experience and the knowledge required. Another thing that we had to look at was a big issue, which was remuneration, how to get paid, as many of those in different regions. I think all in all, for the pilot program, we had about 35 Youth on the Move fellows from everywhere, including from Syria, who were now based in Jordan, from Iraq, now based in Jordan as well, to Venezuelans who are now based in different parts of Latin America and Italy and that kind of thing, from those in Kakuma refugee camp. So as you can imagine, the national requirements and national guidelines for who is allowed to have a bank account, how money can be received internationally differed a lot based on the national context. And this was something that we had to go around because UN agencies don't necessarily allow for things like remittance services, Western Union to be used. So we had to set up almost an entirely new compensation system for them to receive it, and oftentimes encounter a lot of difficulties because it was very difficult to explain to Western Union, for instance, why we were sending money to so many different areas in such vast quantities, as their system was not set up to be a method of formal payment either. So these are just a couple of the challenges that we encountered, and I'm pleased to say that this program has now been adopted within the UN VA system, so will now be something that they are incorporating into their wider internship and remunerated volunteering system.
Interesting. Yes, thank you so much for your input. All right, what can we consider as like the top 3 or 4 main challenges whenever we're recruiting displaced individuals in a remote job? I believe we all agree on the payment being one of the main issues that we have, and we're going to talk about it in a few of so I would like to listen to all of you on what are the main challenges other than the payment that you have faced already.
So for us, there's 2 sides, right? There's like the employees and then the employers. For us, a big challenge from employers is just like a lack of education, I would say, around the situations in certain countries. I think there's a misunderstanding of different countries and different regions. I think, for example, Lebanon at the moment, like if you read the news in the West, it looks like there's a full-on war, and there's like, everyone's like, I don't want to employ someone from Lebanon because of the news. And actually, the reality is that is happening in some certain parts, but there's also thousands of other people that are in Lebanon in places where they're still working fully remotely, right? So I think there's a education piece wherever you are in the world. I use Lebanon as an example of where we're based at the moment, but I know, for example, that that's a big problem in Sudan, and there's a lot of education that needs to be done on that. I think that needs to come from like a government level, and it should be up to governments to like at that level. There needs to be big corporations, especially, they need the reassurance a lot more than countries like, for example, Dubai. I've never been asked in Dubai, is the situation stable in Lebanon? Whereas it's the first question that I'm asked by an employer, let's say in the UK. So I would say one of the biggest problems is that, and like an awareness piece that they see one bad news article and then they just actually would write off a whole country and a whole talent pool. I think that also goes to the point even further of like, what? There's developers in Lebanon? Why would I go to Lebanon to hire, right? That's actually where the whole piece for us is challenging those stereotypes and even kind of spreading the awareness that talent, there is so much tech talent there. I think, like Yusuf said, within the beneficiaries and employees pool, there's very specific challenges that face different countries and different regions. I would say one big problem that we've had in the Middle East, for example, is like reliable access to internet. We have found all of our team have UPSs installed in their houses, and a lot are moving now to solar panels and things like that. That has been a big part of the kind of operational challenges around the team. But again, these are all, I see these as like temporary obstacles, because basically if you're a refugee or you're on the move, you're really good at finding solutions generally because you've had to. And all of my team are the most like solution-based people. Initially there's a mad panic when the internet goes down, you know what I mean? And then they all hustle and they find solutions, whether that's hotspotting or, you know, moving location, or now getting these UPSs, which are the most reliable part for us. But it's also a certain adaptability that I think we have as a company, that really allows for more solutions to come up and to just be able to adapt faster when there's situations that arise like a blackout. I could go on for hours about other topics, but I'll let others speak about it.
We can speak about it a lot. We can speak about the blackouts a lot. All right. Very interesting points that you've mentioned between education, between governmental support, and just supporting organizations or corporations like yourself in terms of what is the current situation. And yes, we can actually deliver on time, and we can actually deliver a high quality service, even though we are operating in an unstable kind of country at the moment. Yusuf, what would be your input in terms of the main challenges other than payments?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I'd break them down into two main buckets. I think the first one would be with regards to like the legal status of the migrants or the refugees within the country, right? So some countries, the refugee cards that they issue have an expiry date, and that is linked to your mobile phone data or your house internet. And once that expires, then you have to go through a bureaucratic process in order for you to renew it. In some other countries that I'm speaking specifically where the Sudanese migrants and refugees are at right now, you know, the Egypt, Ethiopia, Nairobi, in Kampala, right? So once that is expired, then your whole digital infrastructure is lost, right? So how are you going to be able to kind of tap into that? I think some people were able to kind of innovate, find Starlink subscriptions and so on and so forth, and that's how they were able to kind of overcome some of these legal status issues and how they tie into an inefficient or broken digital infrastructure. I think the second bucket would be with regards to the skill verification, right? The state in Sudan has collapsed. The institutions in Sudan have collapsed, right? So if somebody comes up to me and says, hey, this is my experience, X, Y, and Z, you need to do a very rigorous kind of like examination and testing in order for you to vet if these actually are the skill sets that the person actually possesses, right? So you go beyond just looking at a CV and agreeing that, hey, he's done these things, these are the references I need to speak to actually auditing the skills that this person has and to see if this person actually has what it takes in order for them to kind of accomplish this this job. The other two within that bucket would be the language and cultural differences, right? English, yes, is a second language in Sudan, but Arabic is the main language. So for a lot of the people that left the country forcibly right now, they're finding difficulties finding jobs or even breaking the cultural barrier between them and some of the recruiters that are coming in, because they might speak the language, English language, but they don't speak English culturally. And these are two different things that people do not often understand, right? Just grasping the language and then speaking the culture. And that might be another difficulty that they might face. So these are things that we're facing within the communities that we're working with right now and in all of the countries that Sudanese people are currently displaced in.
Interesting. Hajara, would you like to add anything?
Yes, sure. They have mentioned some points I would add, but one thing I would want to add as well, even it's as a personal experience of mine, would be time zone coordination. If you're speaking of remote work in the global remote work space, sometimes it's very difficult. You have things that are like SOS, and then it's midnight and then you can't reach the person. Like there's just like different, so there's always that challenge of how to harmonize, because it's possible something would come up but that person is online. So that's one challenge I just want to highlight, but they have actually mentioned other challenges I would have wanted to mention, for instance language as well. Just to build on the language one, as he said, for instance, in Sudan, English is a second language. You would realize that there is a lot of talent out there. They have the experience, but you're looking for someone that knows how to speak both English and French fluently and have that working language proficiency. But it's kind of like, it's like that French or that Arabic or that Spanish or that Chinese that is like stopping you from hiring these candidates because they don't have that second language. So language barrier and time zone coordination as well, it's a major challenge.
Right. So we'll add to this as language as well. And then would you
Just
add
one question. Sorry, Mohammad, just interrupt you. One comment on that, Hajara. I was having a really interesting conversation last night with some guys in finance in England, and they were telling me, I was saying the same about the time zone as how it's an issue, and they actually said that they've started now working with designers in the Philippines because the time zone is actually a positive. So they get to the end of their day, then they send all of their decks and presentations over to the now designers in the Philippines, but they've chosen specifically because of the time zone. And I just thought, and so then they send over the decks overnight and then they've got them ready for the next morning. And I thought that that was such a good and positive example of where the time zones can actually benefit. Definitely there's challenges around that, but I think it's important when talking about like negatives around employing refugees and people in different time zones, that actually switching on the other side also can be a massive bonus too.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you.
Yeah, some of these companies advertise that they work 24 hours, which is
Yeah, that is like the first no-go. When I see that, I'm like, no.
To be honest.
Elena, would you like to add anything from your end?
Yeah, I think maybe one of them is tying together a lot of what everyone has said already, which I completely agree with in terms of the challenges, and the other one's a slightly newer one. The first one is that all of this, I think, lends itself to one major challenge, which is that a lot of times many companies are not set up to be that flexible when it comes to understanding things like recruitment, understanding things like ways of working, or understanding things like potential disruptions to internet, or even having to maybe invest in someone because there could be a refugee who's, for example, very, very skilled, but they might need some help actually getting access to the internet or having their devices fixed. And these should all be seen as, I think, robust investments into your employees and your workforce, because being blocked off to having that kind of flexibility or having that kind of negotiation actually cuts yourself off from a large pool of talent. And actually, one thing that we found is that considering these different ways of becoming more flexible actually becomes a strength for an organization, because then you're able to navigate different challenges, go into further contexts and further situations, other countries that you haven't been in before, for instance, or become more flexible to things like COVID, when we all had to suddenly become remote. So actually, flexibility should be seen as not a hindrance, but actually a strength for an organization. But that's still a mindset I think we need to change. That's maybe one of the first challenges. And the second that I've seen, perhaps from the community perspective, is that there's still a bit of a mismatch between being able to bring companies and job matching to the communities that need it, mainly because it's hard for displaced communities to access it when they're on the move. Once they settle, they may not be the right resources at hand. There may be issues of accessing basic services to even begin to explore these opportunities. And so there needs to be more of a pipeline built between, for example, wonderful companies like the ones represented here, and organizations like the UN and other institutions on the ground, to building that pipeline of talent, helping with things like qualification recognition, access to resources in order to build it up. And one of the examples I can give is an organization called Amala Education, which actually does high school diplomas and degrees for displaced young people, and they have an incredible pool of talented people who are flexible, who are adaptable, who are incredibly intelligent and have lots of skills. But for them to build the pipeline of actually finding employment afterwards is quite difficult. So how we can align all these different levels in our society to make sure that refugees have a way to go, and it's not on them to go and find it in WhatsApp groups and social media, but trying to create an ecosystem for them to fall back on is something that we need to work on.
Interesting. Amazing. All right. So I believe we've mentioned so many challenges that organizations face whenever they're recruiting remote displaced individuals for projects, for initiatives. And I believe that throughout the process, there was a lot of bumps and challenges, but I think that everybody has figured out some solutions for them. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to highlight some of the main challenges that I think we've spoken about and we've discussed already. First challenge is basically payment. So I would like to hear from you on how did you actually overcome the payment challenge. I think, and if you can give us some examples according to those regions that you've been operational in.
Shall I go? I feel I always go first. I'll start with
I believe
Greece.
we fixed it already, so let's go.
Okay, we spent hours and I mean years literally trying to build sustainable solutions in this. Again, this is only on behalf of like the countries that we're working in. I'm not with this bigger issues, but basically in Lebanon, we had it even for the Lebanese, we had problems for them getting bank accounts as well, let alone then being a refugee there too. For us, we don't use the traditional banking routes at all, just because of the Lebanese economy not being able to sustain that. So we have set up Wise accounts for all of our team. I have one Syrian guy who's totally undocumented, and I pay him in cash each month in dollars. But the others, we've all found ways around, whether that's Wise now accepts refugee IDs. So the Palestinians that are in Lebanon have a Wise account. That it is limited in terms of what they can withdraw and what they can use the card for. So we do always try to use cash where we can. The Lebanese now have got bank accounts in country, which is great. But for us, we also didn't have the luxury of having a local entity within the Middle East. Everything that we've done is through the UK company, which has made all of the hurdles like 10 times worse, because having a UK bank account is is a huge privilege, but also does not work well with the countries that we are working in. So I would say WISE is a great option. There's also lots of up and coming solutions. There's one called NSave at the moment, which is an amazing option for Middle East people, whether they're refugees or not refugees, to have offshore accounts in Switzerland. They don't need to pay tax there. They don't need to have a visa to be there. And it's just a really innovative solution that I haven't seen lots of in the Middle East. So anyone looking or working in the Middle East, have a look at it. It's called NSave, N with an N and then save. I think cash and accounts such as WISE is super interesting, and it is actually more sustainable. Like, sorry, cash is not sustainable in large quantities, obviously, of people, but WISE has really been a sort of super integral part for us. I think what's important to consider with working with remote employees is the bank fees. We spend thousands on bank fees, which we now price into our client quotations, which we didn't do for the first year, and we were crippled by the transfer fees, whether that's in terms of exchange rate or the actual fees themselves in the transfers. So I think one thing to consider is, especially if you're an employee, is make sure that you try to get your fees covered by your employer, because that can actually end up being a big chunk of your salary. And I think it's something very easy to not negotiate until it's too late, and then you get the transfer and you can be missing sometimes up to $100, $200. So I think that is something that I wish I thought about from the beginning. So hopefully that's helpful.
Interesting. All right. Anybody else would like to add up on the payments challenge?
Yeah, I mean, somebody just mentioned Elevate. Elevate was part of the startup that I founded in Sudan called Bloom. They're part of YC 2022, and then after the Sudan conflict, they kind of segued over and then set up their shop in Dubai. But that being said, the why story for Sudanese people is completely different. By merely just putting Sudan in any of your transactions in WISE, your account will automatically get blocked because of US sanctions. And that goes to all of the digital banks that are there, right? I mean, in 2017, the US government did come out and say that they lifted Sudan out of the OFAC list. And basically, Sudan has been on a sanction list by the US since 1995. Because of claims that the Sudanese government was part of some terrorist attacks that happened in the United States and so on and so forth. But that aside, these restrictions harm the regular Sudani person as opposed to it harming the governments, right? Governments and government officials always have ways to kind of find themselves around these things. But what's left with disadvantage is a population of 42 million people that is very difficult for them to get banking services elsewhere. I mean, for us to be able to kind of go around that, you either go through Hawala system, and then basically Hawala system is basically an unofficial remittance services that is widely used in East Africa. You know, it uses family and friends networks in order for you to mobilize funds from point A to point B. And aside from that, Western Union, and with Western Union, you take a lot of hits when it comes to the fees, the transaction fees, and so on and so forth. And just like Laura said, you can actually try to get your employer to cover these costs, but as the costs increase, employers are going to look at you as an added cost and will actually not prefer to hire you, right? So this is where challenges come in, and where solutions are applicable one way in one place, they're not applicable in other places. So we're doing a lot of lobbying from our side, speaking to a lot of friends who are in the fintech space to kind of go back to wherever governments that they're working with to kind of de-risk Sudanese citizens in order for them to be able to access banking services.
Interesting. All right. Elana, Hajara, would you like to add on this, or you'd like to participate in the next question?
Yeah, I can definitely add on, and thank you everyone as well for the further solutions, because we're always looking for more. I think one thing that we really tried to do was be as flexible as possible with the platforms that we used, because we encountered similar problems where like WISE did not work in all different spaces. some people had bank accounts, some people didn't, the transfer fees. And so we used in the end 3 different platforms to cover everyone, Western Union, Remitly, and one whose name escapes me, it's in red, but trying these different platforms to see which countries are covered by who and how we can do so. Another thing that we use as a policy to try and overcome some of the issues around changing currencies, for instance, devaluing currencies, and also transfer fees, is we had a policy of covering all transfer fees, and then also using a stable currency in terms of their contract to make sure that they were still receiving a good amount no matter what. So for example, having contracts set up in US dollars as a stable currency to make sure that their pay was not fluctuating based on inflation, for instance. So that's also something that we definitely overcame. But it was difficult, and I would say that sometimes encountering issues and delays in the payments, because sometimes these platforms would then ask for further verification, asking for proof of contracts, or why are you sending money to this specific person. And so having to be able to respond quickly, being able to work with a credible institution, for instance, always helps.
Hajara, would you like to add on this?
Yeah, just to add a solution-based comment that I know we use. Is either we use, as I mentioned earlier, an employer of contract. It makes the salary payment easier, and it helps to mitigate the whole currency fluctuations and taxation issues as well. Or we usually look for a third payroll provider companies, depending on the locality. Or we look for a cash transfer based organizations, and we tend to partner with them and work with them so we can get payments out to these people in a timely manner.
Great. My next question is going to be more on the legal challenges that you usually face, and basically adjusting your processes, your internal processes, for it to fit such recruitments. So in terms of legal challenges, I believe Yusuf mentioned at the beginning of the call that in a lot of cases, whenever we have to deal with a displaced recruit, is that usually their immigration cards or their stay in that country card is going to expire, and whenever it expires, they lack access to anything in terms of infrastructure of that country. So this is one of the legal challenges. I believe everybody had their different stories in terms of legal challenges as well, which I would like to know more about. And in terms of recruitment processes, internal processes inside of your organizations, I believe that there wasn't one size fits all whenever it came to recruitment, because whenever you are expanding your operations and you have to recruit more people that are displaced in different countries, then different strategies and different processes are going to have to come in place for it to basically mold around and for you to be able to cater. So I'd like to hear from everybody on how did you actually deal with that?
Can you just rephrase your question?
All right, let's talk about the legal challenges that you faced. How did you overcome it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for us, we tried to set up shop in Egypt. They said it'll cost us more than $4,000 and more than 11 months. Same things in Kenya and in Uganda. We set up a Delaware company in less than 24 hours. We set up offshore bank accounts, and we were able to kind of set up freelance contracts for everybody that we kind of work with, right? We just needed to make sure that the right people were in the right places in order for them to kind of present the legal documentation. As far as the Savannah management team and the advisory board, to ensure that we utilize our network of people in the diaspora that have worked with us previously in order for them to kind of get into management positions in order for us to be able to bypass a lot of these legal bureaucracies. So I think setting up in Delaware was and is the easiest way for a lot of people to kind of maneuver You don't need to be in the US or have any ties to the United States as long as you pay taxes, right? And this is what we tell a lot of these countries, right? Legalize a lot of these refugees, legalize a lot of these migrants and give them a way to kind of work. And then you're going to benefit from them by being able to tax them. They're going to be able to open businesses and they're going to employ people and so on and so forth. But once people start working outside of the legal system, it's going to be very hard in order for you to kind of convince them to come back, you know. You haven't taxed me, I've been making money, and now you want to tax me. I'll just fly elsewhere where I'm more very well received and so on and so forth. So this was our workaround solution.
Laura, I believe the UK registration as well helped.
Yeah, so for us, we similarly tried locally to register and it took forever. So I kind of just gave up on that approach. For us, what we have done now is all of our team are employed basically as consultants, and we pay them, they invoice the company and then they pay them monthly salaries. I think this works for us. Also, having one of the questions I saw was about thinking about everything from the refugee point of view. I said to my team, like, listen, guys, what is important to you? You know, if I employ you through the UK business or European business, let's say, as full-time employees, I can give you maybe like a insurance or benefits from that, from the company being registered there, but that's actually not what they want, right? So they wanted to be consultants so that they invoice the company and then it's then up to them wherever they are in the world to pay their own tax. I think that works specifically well for us because everybody's working remotely, right? That wouldn't work so well if they were in Europe or in the UK because they don't get the benefits of being here then, such as like our tax law is called PAYE and things like that. So for us, that works specifically. I think what's important is exactly to ask the employees as well, like at what's important for them and what do they want, because like what Yusuf was saying, you obviously pay the tax depending on what country you're in, and actually for some refugees and displaced people, that is really important so that they get onto a payroll system in a country, especially hopefully where they then there are, because it means that it's much easier to get integrated. Whereas in Lebanon, paying tax is maybe a bit of a more controversial topic because of where that tax goes. So that was the feedback from the team, and that's what we adapted and how we adapted around it.
I don't know, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think maybe the context that I come from is slightly different because, of course, you guys are from a private sector company's point of view. I think the difficulties that we had to navigate in terms of legality was that we had to navigate both us being registered in the UK, but it was a charitable program, so we didn't have to necessarily pay taxes based on profit, but we also had to get around UNICEF's own requirements as well. And one of the issues and one of the reasons why we partnered with them was that UNICEF themselves could not necessarily pay non-bank account holders, and so that was part of the partnership, was that we had the flexibility to offer them that, but then we also had to make sure that we had justifications for every single payment made, also justifications and explanations for why certain countries had different issues, why transfer fees went up and went down in different platforms. Also, safety and safeguarding legality became an issue, and we had to make sure that in terms of contracts, everyone that was working with them underwent safeguarding training, and had an understanding of that. Also, we had an emergency response plan as well for some of those who were in more vulnerable situations. What would we do if they came to us for help that we couldn't necessarily provide, for instance, from a remote point of view? Another thing as well was in the contracts we set up for them, specifically around compensation. Some of them would ask, actually, can you send the money to my brother or to my partner because they have a bank account and they can receive it. So then one of our questions was, we will be happy to do that, but how do we make sure that your money is protected as well? And so we had specific contracts set up and things for them to sign to say they understood that they were meant to pass the money on and they would be legally bound to do so. So really trying to set up these frameworks, health insurance and things, for instance, was a big challenge, but it was very important that I think we ticked a lot of these boxes in a way that protected them and protected the institution that we worked for, but at the same time allowed them to dictate actually what was good for them, because sometimes being registered on a national health insurance wasn't good because it would be allowing them to be opened up towards government scrutiny that they didn't necessarily want to be exposed to. But going through an alternate country or an international health insurance was much better. So being flexible to what their needs are, like Laura was saying, is very, very important.
Hajara, would you like to add anything to that as well?
Yes, please. Just a point. I agree with Laura. We use the same solution based, which is if we're finding it challenging to hire in a country, we just go through the consultancy contract route. It seems to be easier, even in terms of payment. Another thing we do is sometime last year we tried to create like a global mobility policy. So this allowed us to look at, for instance, countries that allow payment in USD. Some countries don't allow, maybe even if it's a remote worker, they don't allow that you pay them in USD. So we had to like look at those countries, like, okay, these countries are open to allowing their local employees take payment in USD. So those ones are easier for, but those that don't allow payments in USD, it's a bit tricky when you come to in terms of payment. So that's when we go for the consultancy option.
I believe I still have a lot of questions for us to go about, but our time is running out. So I'm gonna go for my last question before I introduce Amy to everybody. My last question, I believe majority of the people who are attending our session today, I saw some notifications pop up in the messages. It's what type of support do you usually provide your recruits? I mean, in post-hire. So you did your recruitment, you did your interviews, you selected who are the people that you want to recruit. They're on the job. What's an additional support that you usually provide for your new recruits, for you to support them given all of the challenges that they have being a displaced individual?
Okay, so I think I can go first here. So we do send, no matter where you are, globally, we do send an onboarding package from the HQ in US to you. What we try to do is we try to plan way ahead your start date, just so you have your work tools, and depending on your locality, anything that would support your work to move smoothly. We tend to send it from the HQ. So we kind of like have an onboarding package, or rather a pack that has everything that you would need on your first day, all the information that you need. Another thing is we try to schedule virtual calls with different teams across the world, just so you feel comfortable, just so you feel in tune, just so you're in the like right space to get your work started. We do provide a buddy system as well. Someone that is like your best friend at work, your go-to person. Usually we try to find someone within the same continent as the person. If we're able to find, maybe you're just like the only employee we have within that locality, we try to find the person nearest to you that understands your culture and that can help you fit into the organization and like integrate beautifully.
Amazing. Right. Elena, would you like to go next?
Yes, yeah. So actually, with some of the support that we provide is similar to what Hajara said. Obviously, our context is a bit different because they're young people who are just starting their careers, and there's also a finite end to to their fellowship, it can't go over a year. So one thing that we do is we do a one-to-one interview with them at the start and understand a bit more about what their interests are, what their skills are, where they like to see themselves in the future, and then we match them to a mentor that's part of the wider network of civil society and youth interested in helping migrants to that. So people, for example, they want to continue their education, we'll match them with someone who has a lot of experience getting scholarships to universities. If they would like to become an entrepreneur, then we'll find someone who has experience doing that to become a mentor to them for the next 3 to 6 months, and an option to continue extends to a year. And that person's there to help them set some goals, understand what skills they want to build, and also help them make connections to further their path later on. And then something that we do is work as a team with both the mentor and also their UNICEF supervisor to make sure that they're building those skills, building the portfolio that they need to ascend to the career path that they would like later. And this has been quite successful. I think at least a couple of them have gotten consultancy contracts with UNICEF or another UN organization afterwards, particularly things like communications and content production, which a lot of them were interested in, Gen Zs, you know. And then also we've had them link up to then talk on further to other civil society organizations, talking to further organizations about how they can open up their talent pool to recruit from these areas. So really trying to make sure that they have the tools needed to continue afterwards.
Right, Yusuf.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have as many resources as both Hajara and Elana. But what we're keen on is connecting them to mentors and giving them access to our networks in the places that we have friends that we're able to kind of open doors for them. I think that's the most important thing, especially for displaced personnels. They need to be able to integrate into these new communities and get to know people that will make their journey a lot easier in navigating these markets. So I think one of the main things that we do is both mentorship and just opening doors to our network.
Great. Laura?
Yeah, for us, it's definitely smaller scale too. One of the big things that we've done is we started from the beginning, like this onboarding deck, and then each new employee that comes, they also add their input. So from wherever they are in the world, whether that's about communication or understanding cultural differences at work. And now this document is really essential. It's got links to all of our like information of all the documents that we have internally, who our clients are, kind of how we speak about things, all of that. One thing that we focused on a lot with onboarding new employees is like the communication part of things. And I think this is a thing that as you scale becomes much harder to manage at a scalable level. For us, it can be very like one-on-one based, whether it's through me speaking to them or somebody else in the team. But a lot of what we work around is like communication in terms of almost over communicating, right? So biggest thing for us at Concat is clients should always know what we're working on and when, even if we're delayed and it's our fault and we need more time. Things like over communicating to our clients, not leaving the end of the day without having replied to all of emails, things like that. We've really progressed to focus on that, especially from day one. I think a lot of things are it's really good to have some key values that you want to be implemented from day one, I think, with any new employee, wherever they're coming from in the world, because it's much harder once they're into a routine to create change amongst that. So we're very clear from the beginning where our expectations are, and things like the flexible working hours and taking holiday, that is something that we value super highly at Concat, and a lot of people do work different hours or take lots of days off. Like we don't have a limit on the number of holiday days that people can take, and that means that the people that want to come and work with us, small differences like this in our job descriptions or things like that, make a big difference to the diversity of the candidates that we get, I think. And a lot of the work I'm doing now with employers about trying to diversify their candidate pool is by changing the language about these small things that actually really do make a difference to more diverse candidates that might need different requirements for jobs. But yeah, having a handbook that says everything is a great way. You can also get it translated into local languages, which has worked really well for us, so that there's just definitely no misunderstanding about those cultural nuances, especially.
Nice. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for giving me your input on the panel today. Next, we have Amy Fallon, who's Associate Innovation Officer at UNHCR Innovation, who will provide some reflections on today's panel. Amy, how are you today?
I'm great, thanks. It's really nice to be here, everyone. This was such a fascinating panel. I really think there's not enough conversations that include organizations who actually employ refugees. You know, at UNHCR, we're kind of in the midst of building out our first digital employment strategy. And I know that there are so many other organizations in the space who play this supporting role. But I think if we're going to build something that's actually useful, we do need to make sure that, you know, organizations like yours that are actually in this like employment position are at the table. So yeah, I'm just going to summarize a few of the thoughts that you guys have shared, and then maybe pose a couple of open questions. So we started talking about recruitment practices, and something that was striking about all your answers is that you are still using recruitment through existing networks, trusted third parties, headhunters. And I wonder if anyone had any reflections on how we integrate refugees into those networks. We mentioned third-party organizations, but how do we sensitize kind of headhunters? How do we work with employment platforms to maybe make sure that refugees are included even in that first step, that pool that you then go and sift through to provide employment? We moved on to remote recruitment and some of the challenges to do with that. I loved what Yusa said about the idea that all remote workers are equal. I think at UNHCR, when we're looking at this space, this is kind of our rallying cry. And it's why we really want to try and couple remote work with a very robust connectivity strategy, because we understand that, you know, remote work doesn't exist without infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure. We've just launched our connectivity strategy at the end of last year. Its goal is to make sure all refugee hosting areas are connected to the internet by 2030. And I think, you know, the different methods you guys have shared to support your employees to get that access is incredible. And I would love to kind of hear more about that, and also, I guess, try and mainstream that as an approach. You know, you don't want to make employers nervous about the additional work that they would have to do to engage with forcibly displaced communities. However, the reality is that if you want to, you know, really support someone to do the best work that they can, you need to ensure that they have the connectivity and the infrastructure that they need. Also agree that we need a broader conversation on global mobility. The tax implications, the payment difficulties that have been a huge portion of this conversation is something that, you know, we're very aware of. And I think, you know, the approach taken at the moment is that this needs to be a case of working country by country, right? Especially in terms of your lobbying strategy. What works for Kenya won't work for Sudan, won't work for Iraq. And finding kind of context-specific solutions to different payment models is going to be really, really important. However, I think everyone on this call would agree that we've kind of learned more about the different workarounds you can use for payment in the last hour than you could, you know, find online, or that your general employer might be able to uncover. So I think an open question for the group is, how do we ensure that these lessons are captured and that they're available and that they're shared more widely with employers who are interested in engaging with the refugee employment space, but maybe don't you know, fear the amount of work it would take to uncover these workarounds. I'll say a little bit more, but on the challenges with recruitment of refugees. So UNHCR and also ILO have released countless numbers of research on this area, and I can link some of them in the chat. I do think they're looking at it from an employer lens, and looking at this education piece, as Laura mentioned, is super important. As UNHCR, we've released a series of policy papers called Displaced and Disconnected, which try to kind of lay out the landscape of refugees' legal rights and access to connectivity to online work. However, a static policy paper on a UNHCR webpage often doesn't get into the right hands and changes every week, every month. So I guess another open question, like how do we keep a more active, more alive conversation on these rights and form a bit more of a supportive ecosystem in terms of our lobbying priorities as professionals engaged in trying to get more refugees into the digital economy. Finally, I'll just talk about the legal challenges. So yeah, each participant spoke about kind of the policy implications of digital work and the policy changes that are needed. I guess one thing I'd ask is, ask to the panel is, are there kind of low-hanging fruits that we can engage with? So for instance, one thing we're testing at the moment and will continue to test, and I know Namal does this a lot as well, is working with intermediaries, so remote work, freelance platforms, to try and reduce the barriers that refugees face to even accessing those platforms. So for instance, we created one jobs platform in Ethiopia called Boundless Skills, and it was created specifically to face some of the challenges that refugees have, and it accepts a refugee ID, for instance, to register the website, which is something that a lot of jobs platforms don't have. This doesn't negate the issue of needing ID to get a bank account in your country, for instance. However, that platform can be the intermediary. So if a company can hire the Gabeya, for instance, to then outsource workers. So I guess it's another issue of workarounds, and this is the endlessly fascinating and difficult thing about working in this space, is that it's a constellation of different workarounds. So yeah, I'll stop there. A couple of questions, couple of reflections in there. I think just finally to say thank you so much to all of the participants. Really hope to engage with all of you going forward as we build out our approach. I think there's a really open question for us about what is the strategic advantage and the strategic role of huge organizations like the UN in creating this supportive ecosystem. Yours is sourcing jobs. Maybe ours is policy, is lobbying, is, everyone has a different sort of role to play. But would love to engage in conversation on what that might be. So thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Like, really valuable insights. I'm not sure if the panel want to respond to any of Amy's questions or thoughts, or any questions from the audience. So maybe I'll leave it to the panel first. Anyone want to respond? Elana, thanks.
I guess. Oh, you go, sorry.
Sorry, Laura, do you want to go first? Or?
No, you go. Much more polite of you.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks so much, Amy. I think it was really salient points, and I just want to respond to two of them. I think the first question in terms of how to build an ecosystem for lobbying and changing recruitment. So I'm putting on my advocacy hat now with my organizations and platforms, and I think the first thing that we seem really useful is to build out these multi-stakeholder working groups for ongoing dialogue so that we can continue building, even if it's not a research paper, but ongoing conversations and a repository of best practices, databases for ongoing programs, solutions and knowledge exchange. And that's always, I think, very useful. We've seen that work very well in the migration space. And then the second, in terms of low-hanging fruit, this is something that I would appeal to everyone, whereas when in building any kind of program or any kind of recruitment platform, I would say even for the middlemen and the third parties, involving displaced communities, involving the communities on the ground is so important into building any kind of system, because that's the only real way that you can understand their needs and be able to respond accordingly, as well as also be able to reach them on the ground so they're even aware of it. So that's something that I want to say, refugees, migrants, everyone are agents of change, and everyone's looking for opportunities, and they should be involved at all levels.
Thanks, Elana. Laura, do you want to go next?
I love that. Thanks, Elana. I think for me, what is missing really on the kind of employment angle is actually from the kind of corporates and employers' point of view, where there's still so many negative myths basically around hiring refugees. I was on a call last week with the head of social impact, one of the heads of social impact at LinkedIn, and they said before the call, like we don't really have like an internal policy around hiring refugees. And this for me was like the biggest red flag, right? Like they're meant to be the global leading employability and employment platform. And they themselves are saying that. So I've sent them an email to ask more and ask about the specifics within the policy, that what it says, because I doubt it says we can't hire refugees directly, right? So I think actually there's an element of education around that. Like I can't say what their policies are and what they say, but I would love to know, and I would love to actually see what the wording is around that and understand how we can change that and how we can diversify those policies, because actually we can do all the training and all the upskilling for refugees, but if the corporates and companies then have these internal supposedly blockages, and I think that's where like I'd love to see some input from the UN and UNHCR, like looking at this research piece around what are these policies, what are these issues, and what are these challenges, because I think a lot of them have just actually never been challenged, rather than no one's really looked into it at a point of detail, because every company policy is obviously super unique and super specialized. But I think from our point of view is first of all educating ourselves around what these policies are, but also at global level, because I think that is where we can advocate for a lot of change, even around the wording in those internal policies. And I think if we could do that at global level, that would be an absolute game changer in terms of diversity.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just jump in and add 2 words. I think if you're designing things for refugees, include refugees in the design phase, right? Include them in the conversation that's being had, because that firsthand experience is what's going to shape it, right? You don't want to design something that then does not fit, because the targeted audience has just been consulted, but wasn't there in the design phase from the get-go. So yeah, I think that's the lowest hanging fruit.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Anyone in the audience want to raise your hand and make a quick question? We've got 4 minutes left, so if it's a 2-minute question. I mean, otherwise, I guess I'll jump in, as the moderator, and, as the host, I've got that liberty now to say that this is a really interesting session. And, Amy, when you questioned about a place to gather these insights, so one of the goals of the summit this year is to create a toolkit to support employers in hiring displaced talent in many different formats. So this is part of the work that we'll be doing as a summit after this week. So watch out for that. We'll be in touch with all of you about that. And also, I think you're right, Laura, we have to bring the companies to the table. And I think this is what's been lacking, because we've been doing it in such piecemeal ways, having, small company here and small company there, startups, smaller companies interested in the work that we're doing, but we haven't had any global momentum from a big corporate. Not that I've come across. It'd be great to know if anyone's come across any big corporate really engaged in this space, but I think that's needed. We need someone big to come on board to lead the way, because what we're doing is amazing, but I think we're too small to really. We're breaking the surface, but a lot more can be done if we have a lot more resources behind us. So, and Amy, thanks for all your insights. It was really valuable to hear the work that UNHCR is doing in creating the livelihood strategy, because we hope this will really create a pathway for us all to follow. But as Yusuf said, and I know you do, have displaced talent at the table, have organizations like CONCAT, like NAML, like all of us who are doing the work, who are working with the talent, to hear about our experiences, because every day we come across a new challenge and a new solution, and things change just so quickly. Just hearing the solutions to payment and Save and Elevate. These are 2 new entities which we've come across. Sami in the chat says they're doing something as well. So we really need to engage a much larger ecosystem so we know what's happening. I'm going to leave it for any final thoughts.
I was just going to say, I put this in the chat, but I'd love if people could take a look at the report that we released at the end of last year. We ran consultations with over 500 refugees in 8 countries to not just ask them about the challenges they're facing with remote work, right? Because I think we kind of know a lot of the challenges. There's been lots of amazing research done on this, but actually to ask them what kind of solutions they would like to see. And we've had some really, really interesting findings from that. And it's, forming the baseline of pretty much all of the work that we're doing. So please do take a look at that. It's a great, great report that we're really proud of.
Yeah, I can vouch. It's a really great report. I was really excited to read it. Okay, 1 minute to go. I just want to thank every one of you. This has been such a fantastic panel. Really excited. Thank you all. Let's stay in touch. And for those of you in Kenya, I just want to say again, our thoughts are with you in this interesting times that you're living through. So we have some more sessions tomorrow. I can't remember what's happening tomorrow. Maybe Suhara, Izzy, can you post in the chat? We have some more exciting panels tomorrow. Please join us for day 3 of the Migration Summit. Follow us online, and we're having a month-long campaign around decent work for refugees. So we'll see you online or in the Zoom room for the Migration Summit. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening, and bye for now. Till tomorrow.